let's talk about the Federal Reserve, which is a powerful institution, and you haven't elected one of these people that help run the 12 different banks that make up the Federal Reserve. The aspect of a falling dollar versus a rising dollar. We talked about it early on when we talked about the aspect of imports. If you're going to import goods into the country, that means you're buying foreign goods. A really strong dollar helps. So for instance, if you want to buy goods, let's say from Canada, and the US dollar is equal to $1 versus the Canadian dollar as $1.20, you can buy a lot of goods in Canada. Literally, having lived in Michigan, whenever we had big disparity between the US versus the Canadian, and the Canadian dollar went up, the bridge called the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit was jam-packed every day from Americans going to Canada to buy cheap gas and then coming back under lunch break, except typically the lines would be an hour and a half long from all these Americans sitting taking advantage of Canadian class. And of course, the Canadians just loved us over there nonstop. So that being said, the strong dollar helped the American consumer. But if I was a Canadian and I wanted to come over to the United States on that big ratio, I had a hard time spending money because it's so expensive here. It's 20% higher than it would be in Canada for the same goods. So really, we talk about the impact of the falling dollar is really helpful for people that come into the United States, tourists that come into the United States, and we're making money from people coming here and also buying our goods. If you have a manufacturing company and you want to compete on the worldwide market, you want to have a falling dollar. It's going to help you because then people will want to come in and take advantage of the weak dollar and buy your product and take it to their country in the process. So falling dollar is great for us as manufacturers. It's bad for us as consumers because we want goods to be cheap. And if you sit down and buy cheap goods, or excuse me, inexpensive goods, okay, the falling dollar hurts you, a strong dollar helps you. So it depends which side of the table that you're on when you're talking about the aspect of it. The people that control the money supplies, there's a group of people called the Board of Governors. They want you to talk to them like that. And if you don't, they'll sit down there and they'll just jack your money supply up and make your life miserable by inflation. Yes, they'll make certain whenever they're around, you always bow and you salute them. Oh, yeah. And the whole process as you go through. And then you have the Open Market Committee. We'll talk about that, but know that there's 12 Federal Reserve banks. That's 10 plus 2, 12. Know that just in case I toss in one of those questions says, there's 11 Federal Reserve banks in the United States. True or false? There's 12. And there's several things. We call the Federal Reserve the banker's bank. And where bankers go to borrow money. We'll talk about that a little bit. Here is actually the 12 different regions of the Federal Reserve. I want you to memorize all the states for each bank. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. That's a waste of time for you and for me in the process. But that being said, here's a map of the banks. I want to talk about the 3 tools that the Federal Reserve uses, and some of them are hugely powerful. This one over here is called the reserve requirement. This of all of them is by far the least used tool because the power is massive as it comes down to it. Let's say, for instance, you go into the bank and you deposit $1,000. The banker doesn't want to sit down and keep the money in the bank. They have to put some of it aside to meet the Federal Reserve requirement. They take your $1,000, they put it into a bin and they lock it in a vault. So you keep $100 of it, and they turn around and your neighbor comes in and they want to build a new pool in the backyard. So they borrow money. So they take your $900 and they loan it to your neighbor and they charge your neighbor interest. Well, the neighbor does all that. They pay the supplier that's installing the pool, and they pay all that $900 supplier. The supplier walks into the bank and they deposit that $900 that was yours, and the bank turns around, puts 10% in. They put $90 of that away in the bank. So now your original $1,000, they have $190 in their vault, and they're loaning out another $810. As you go down, you'll see in the process that that 10% requirement actually isn't just your $1,000, but it's the $90, it's the $810. You keep on going ad infinitum until finally all the money is out in circulation. Your $1,000 deposit actually multiplies into the tens of thousands of dollars in the process. It's incredible when you watch the aspect of it. And if what would happen if the reserve requirement increased by 20%? All of a sudden you have an immediate shrinking of the money supply out there, and it really is the most powerful tool of all of them. So of all of them, the least used is the most powerful, called the reserve requirement. If you want to sit down and work this out, take a piece of paper, put $1,000 and chop it up by taking 10% off multiple times, you'll see the raw power of the money put into circulation by the reserve requirement. That being said, let's talk about two other ones, the open market also operations and the discount rate. Open market operations, what that means is every Tuesday is an auction of the buying and selling of government bonds, actually government notes as well, and even Fed bills, they call them, federal bills. The bills are short-term, the bonds are long-term, and the notes are mid-term. So they have an auction, and pretty much the Fed is looking for a certain dollar value, and they help control the money out there from big institutional investors by saying, okay, we have this 20-year bond over here, and we're selling it for this amount. The people bid on it, and they help control how much money they suck out of circulation by people investing into the federal government. So they have the money supply, they're printing money on top of it, plus also they're selling things out there. They're selling loans of their own money in the form of bonds, because a bond is a loan, and people are paying them the money for it, and they have to eventually pay the money back. So open market operations is a very powerful tool, and there's an auction every week called open market operations. Know that term, because you're going to hear it not just on the test coming up, you're going to hear it in real life on open market operations. You need to have it inside your head if you're going to be in the world of business at all, and at some form, almost all of us are. And the third one is one that has a direct impact on you, called the discount rate. Remember I said that the Federal Reserve is the banker's bank? They loan money to banks. They make a determination. Ta-da! We're going to loan money to the banks at 1%. 1%. Do I hear 1%? 1%? 1%? No, it's not quite like that. But if you're a bank, you go in and you go into the Federal Reserve and you say, okay, I want to borrow money from you, okay, and you're going to charge me 1%. Okay, so they charge them 1%. That 1% then goes out. The bank wants to make money. Surprisingly, isn't it amazing how they want to make money on whatever the money is? So they're going to sit down and they're going to charge people 2% for the same money they just borrowed for 1%. They want to make 100% profit percentage-wise on the interest as they go through. So they set a rate, and they call it the prime rate. Now, by the way, you're a nice person. You have a nice smile. I'm certain you have charm beyond belief, but you ain't getting the prime rate. The people that, sorry, don't tell anybody I said the word ain't, especially your English teachers. So that being said, the prime rate goes to people that are major institutions that have a long history. So if you're General Motors, you walk in and you say, I want to get a loan. Okay, you're General Motors, we'll give you the prime rate. If you are a company that's been around for 20 years, you're going to get the prime rate, and they're going to tax something else on that, a premium of about 1.5%. You are not going to get the 2%. You'll be fortunate if you pay 3%. It's going to probably be 1.5% above prime. So you'll see the number, the prime rate, in almost every economic journal on a weekly basis as to what the discount rate is and what the prime rate, and the prime rate is what banks are loaning money to the prime customers, the ones that are massive, huge, with billions in assets. If you're a new business owner and you want to start a new business, it's pretty common to pay prime plus 2.5 or 2.75%. So it may be 2% prime. You're going to pay almost 5% for your loan because you're not a prime customer, because you're a risk for the bank in the process. So the discount rate plays a huge impact on day-to-day business. So know what that is, know what prime is, and know that the Fed is the banker's bank, and know that there's prime plus is actually what usually businesses pay for. And just so you know, they also have a check clearing rule. So if you write an electronic check or a paper check, it'll end up going through the reserve somewhere, and they go back and they check the whole process. Here is their check clearing system. It's a lot different now that we just sit there and we pop on our phone, we go on Venmo, and it happens over there. It's a withdrawal from an account that they have, but it really follows a similar process you go through. Some of the history with the Fed, it was established in 1907, and really the purpose of the Federal Reserve Act that came shortly after was that all federally chartered banks sat down and had to join the Federal Reserve, and really the purpose was to sit down and head off future depressions and recessions in the era that happened in 1907. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, boom, we had a stock market crash in 1929. Banks locked the doors, wouldn't let people come in and take their money. People jumped out of windows because they bought stock on margin at 1%. So you buy $1,000 worth of stock, you would pay really $10 for the $1,000, and you get a phone call from your local brokers. Yo, I need the other $990 by the end of today. Oh no, what'll I do? And they jumped out the window. And even though I make it sound like it's funny, it wasn't. The whole economy was destroyed in the process. So really, Congress passed a series of bills to go through and establish an insurance policy. And we call the insurance policy the FDIC. And here's actually a picture of a run on banks. Literally, it is a run to the bank to get your money before somebody else did, because the bank would go belly up, and a lot of them did in the process, and a lot of people's lives were destroyed because of bad economic systems, but also bad economic decisions, living on the edge too much. Here's the things I want you to know. The reserve requirement is the most powerful and least used tool because of the fact that the power of it will change the economy almost overnight in how much money is out there. Open market operations is the buying and selling of federal government securities on an open market on a weekly basis. The discount rate is what the Federal Reserve loans money to banks. The banks in turn take the discount rate and they establish a prime rate for their prime customers, and that is out there where they loan money to their customers. And typically for a smaller business, they'll have prime plus as they go through. There's 12 Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve is often referred to as the Fed, okay? It's called the Bankers Bank. And the prime rate, know what that is in general in the process. And keep that in mind also, the fact that we have 12 Board of Governors and not one of them is elected by you or me. They're appointed and the Senate approves the appointment, and they get to sit there for years making decisions that have a daily impact on all of us. With that, take care.